So we're at July 1st, 2026. And the thing that's been showing up in my second screen the most um, is socialism, in particular, Democrats and socialism. So what's happened is uh, some Democratic Socialists of America candidates who always run on the Democrat ticket have won several primaries in districts, House primaries, congressional House primaries in districts that are very heavily Democratic to the point that they're not competitive. So those socialist candidates are likely, almost certainly, going to be elected to the House of Representatives. And lots of people, especially Democrats, are just losing it over this these extreme candidates being co-opting the Democrat Party. So here's my take on it. The question which has been asked several times is, will the United States become a socialist nation? Because these candidates, they do have a lot of enthusiasm for them, especially among younger voters. Which then, if you follow the demographics, although people do become more conservative as they age, but still. And my answer to that is that when you ask that question, what you are saying is, I do not know American history, because America has been a socialist nation since its inception, right? So, like, one of the first big arguments after the United States formed the United States, we got rid of the Articles of Confederation and established a relatively strong central government. One of the fundamental questions was, are we going to have these socialist programs? Now, at the time, 1789, they didn't have the vocabulary that we have today. So, like, socialism just wasn't even a philosophy at that point. But if you look at the literature about the arguments, in particular over establishing a publicly administered postal system, right? Because there were private postal systems, right? Like there were ways to get mail from Boston to Philadelphia or New York, and they were privately ran. But the early American government wrestled with the question: is it fundamentally so important to get mail delivered on time in a reasonable way that we need to make that a public utility? And that's what socialism is. So maybe we need to go and have a real quick primer on what socialism is. So you have goods and services that are provided in a society. Those goods and services can be provided by private entities, right? So like an automobile, right? If you're going to buy an automobile, you're not going to get that from the government, right? That has to come from a private entity. And then there are public goods and services, and generally, so, like, for example, there exist private legal alternatives, arbitration and those type of services, and you can exercise those. But most people, when it comes to administering justice, criminal and civil, we rely upon the public courts, right? Those courts are, and that's that. So socialism is when the public, right, usually through its government, but when the public says, you know what, we are not going to rely upon private enterprises for this particular service or good. We're going to provide that. The way it's usually espoused is the public will take control of the means of production, right? So you could have a society with no public court system, right? Or even if you don't want to go that far, you say, well, okay, we're going to have public judges. Judges are paid by the public, but we're not going to have public property, right? So we're not going to own the courthouses, right? Every court has got to lease the facilities that they hold court in, right? Like there are varying degrees of socialism within the court system. You could do that, but we as a society have said, you know what? The courts, the administration of justice is too important to leave to private enterprise. We are going to establish that as a socialist institution, and we're going to pay for it with public funds, and the public will be the one that administers that system. And that is all through American society, right? The U.S. Marines, right? For most of American history, the U.S. Marines was a purely socialist institution. But in the past 30 years, there have developed private alternatives to that. There are organizations like Blackwater that basically provide the same services that the U.S. Marines have provided for generations: diplomatic protection and exertion of U.S. Force into foreign nations, security but now there are you like, well, no, I'm not going to rely upon the public institutions. I'm not going to rely upon the socialist in this case. We're going to have contractors, private contractors, provide the security in the Benghazi embassy, right? So America has, from its inception, been a blend of socialism and non-socialism. And there have been times when we have looked at particular elements and said, you know what, this particular thing is too important to leave to the private institutions, or sometimes there's just not a private institution to do it. Like when it came to space exploration, there was no private enterprise to do that. So we said, okay, we've got to have a socialist institution, and we developed NASA to launch space exploration in America. Now, after the socialist institution has developed that element to a certain degree, we can now rely upon some level of private enterprise to provide many of the services that were once a purely socialist activity. We see that all over the place. So, will America become a socialist institution? We already are. We have been for 250 years of our U.S. history. We have been a socialist institution, right? The moment we said, you know what, we're going to have the public own property and administer mail service instead of relying upon private enterprise to do that, we were a socialist nation, 100%. That's just a fact. Now, people have a bias against socialism. They just don't like the name, and so they don't like that fact. But it is a fact, and facts don't care about your feelings. So, if you have a different perspective on this, if you have something that you want to contribute to, please leave a comment. I read them all, and I value them all.